Putting on a masterclass right now.
Truly, yes.
Magnus is going to seal this tournament with 2 rounds to spare.
A performance for the ages.
He just
four
won
in a
four
row.
in a row.
This is a clutch chess performance for the ages. The world number 1, Magnus Carlsen, destroying the field. We already saw him do it to reigning world champion Gukesh. Covered those games. I'll link them at the end. And this is what he did to Fabiano Caruana. World number 3, a guy who just won the US Chess Championship. Magnus sweeps him 2-0, and with 2 of the most brilliant GOAT moves we've seen in a long time. We're going to look at both games. It's day 3 of the Clutch Chess Championship in St. Louis. Magnus with white in game 1, and he kicks off just with the calm development of the knight. Fabi invites this king pawn for a Sicilian, but no. Magnus takes us in the English. Clock times are on the left. They get 10 minutes each, plus 5 seconds a move. That's known as excrement. They're over the board. It's exciting. It's tense. No one can quite believe the domination we're seeing here. Magnus now sets up the Maroczy bind, as this is known. The knights develop. Pawn is defended. Do consider subscribing. You just don't get this insight elsewhere. Now we see d6. Bishop e2 takes, centralizes the queen, but here comes the sniper. Soon gonna kick that queen away. First Magnus whispers, stack my bishop. Now we see castles, and with the bishop defended, now this queen drops back. a5, it's modern chess. Push the rook pawn, castles, and a4. Makes a little home for the black queen, as well as gaining space. There's a plethora of plans for white here. You know, sometimes you look for aggression stuff. Soon, not straight away. But Magnus plays over here. Bishop e6. He centralizes this one. The queen streams out into the game. Queen e3 now breaks this pin, because Magnus wants, whoops, not that move. Magnus wants knight d5, but without the queens leaving the board. Not like him. Loves an endgame without the queens on. But here he wants to attack. The bishop's about to leave the board, but first he hops forward. Now, typically speaking, with this pawn attacked, you want to just defend it with the rook and not change the pawn structure. But if you do this, then out of nowhere, there's this expansion move, and it all gets pretty weird. Basically, you shouldn't take on Croissant, even though you want to, because now you have to give up the queen. If you do this, then you run into these kind of pins. There's a lot of lines like this, but these are the kind of troubles, right, with not actually taking the knight. It's this b4 thing. So, Fabi does take. Not an ideal structure now with the pressure on the backwards pawn, but he's going for counterplay. This is a really cool move. Offering the queen exchange, but also offering the pawn. Not taken. Then you run into this. Yes, you win a piece, but black wins a piece too. Counterplay on this pawn. Counterplay on this pawn. Absolutely not what you want to be doing. So Magnus doesn't touch it. He smells a rat, he checks, now we get the knight blocking, and you could go for this plan of rook e1, pile upon the pawn, but this guy, he just sees the board different to anyone in the world, and he plays the epic. Rook d4. He whispers to Fabi, do you even rook lift, bro? And watch what he's got planned. Rook fc8, very natural, eyeing the queen. Surely now Magnus goes rook e1. To look at this weakness, but he plays this instead. Rook c5, and this is where Magnus unleashes the first of 2 absolute GOAT moves in these games. Pawn g4, just launching Gary down the board. If you know a Gary, give him a hug. They're a dying breed here in the UK, and it's absolutely lethal. King g8, h4. He's not done yet. Everyone's having a party. Rook e8 played by Fabi. And because he's now looking for some central counterplay, very thematic if you're being attacked on the flank, punch back through the centre. Magnus now kicks this one back, stumble into d7, and he takes this lovely time out with rook e4, which discourages any kind of push with the pawn. The ensuing structure after takes en passant, or en croissant as we like to say, is not ideal. So Fabi drops back with the queen. Queen e3 puts the pressure on here, And if you go knight b6 to defend like this, you start running into trouble. This knight is just dead, and white can kind of do what they want. Free hand on the king side, in the center. There's no counterplay. So let's run back here. The knight didn't move. If you come to e5, it won't live there long. b3, then f4. So b5 from Fabi. Excellent practical move. The top move here of the Stockness monster is to take that pawn. But Magnus has a little think and crashes through with this pawn expansion. Given the miss, as you can see, but this is human chess. We get takes. Now we get takes here, and Magnus reveals his point. Does he capture the pawn? No, he does not. He plays this before you can say what an incredible Halloween outfit. That one is from Fabiano Caruana. Loves going out as Big Bird. We see the rook move away, and now the pawn drops. But Magnus has just lost a touch of control. Two pawns now attacked by queen and rook. It's getting weird, but this is what he does so well. Digs in and finds this magical rook c7. Queen taken, and now you take here. This is the tactical point. Now we see the rook slide over. Bishop's about to drop. Magnus chucks in this swish and zoog, whispers it towards Fabi. Everyone approves. Now the queen drops, and we get this simplification where when you run it with the engine, it gives it a level game. But in practice, look at the outside passer, ready to run like prime Yasser Serwan, and Magnus playing now rook c7. He's not known as a tactical player, right? He's a strategic genius, but he's so astute, so on top of the tactics at the same time. He's saying, if you check and then win my pawn, you run into a classic hook and ladder tactic. Bang. And you swipe the ladder from under the queen. This is the point. And if you try and move, well, you can't. It's illegal. You're mated. So this is the problem, and it's also the problem if you take with the rook, you get mated. That's it. So the pawn can't be touched. Therefore, we get e5. Magnus takes. So many en croissants in this game. The players must be hungry. Missed their morning
mushrooms.
Rook d8 is actually the best move here, but so often it's not. If you go passive in bullet or blitz, you're usually doomed. So Fabi doesn't want to do it. He tries to break out his king. Magnus wins a clean pawn. This is the game continuation. Queen back hits the pawn. Rook d5 centralizing. Still you can't touch the pawn for the tactics I mentioned earlier. So many checkmating ideas or queen win ideas. So queen b7. Magnus unpins. Now the queen slides over here, but pawn b5. It's the imperial march of that b pawn. Queen c1 check. Queen sliding back here, and Fabi just does not have an answer. Magnus is all over him here. What does he play? Queen b6. And it's just shocking how Magnus makes the best players in the world look like absolute patzers, almost as shocking as this shirt. We see the pawn recapture. Magnus is one to the good, and this is child's play for him. Brings the king around, marches the pawn. Here we see resigns. Why? Because if you check the king, well then it marches in, you build the bridge. This is the classic Lucena idea, if you want to look that one up. Here it's even simpler because you can give the pawn, in fact, and run them with this one. In the classic Lucena, the king's here and then it escorts the pawn through. But here you can just win the pawn like this, make a baby girl, and then obviously you go on to finish off the game something like this. Possibly try and avoid the stalemate. Let's run back here. Final position, jump to the second game because this one is just strategic brilliance. Let's dive in here. We get a king pawn game. Roy Lopez, a6, bishop dropping back, and Fabi's just teasing because now he takes the delayed exchange variation. No clue why it's called that. Rook e1 covers the pawn. Genuine threat to take here, so Magnus backpedals, covers his center. d4 is very direct. Takes, queen takes. Surely you can play bishop f6. Well, no, you run into e5. So castles is best. Bishop f4, we're following tried and tested grandmother theory, but here's the thing. Fabi is trying to win. He's not swapping queens. He's not playing standard moves. He's trying to keep pieces on the board. Now we see bishop c5. Don't blunder your queen. And a5 shows the incredible understanding that these top guys have. Because look at the structure that Magnus is setting up. Here comes the bishop. What's the best move? It's actually knight b3. And then bishop a6. And then you can go queen d1. But then the queens are leaving the board. You want to win the game. So Fabi deliberately plays a worse move, runs into this, and then thrusts forward with the explosive c4. But this isn't quite the same Maroczy bind that Magnus had. Here there's some problems, there's some pins, there's some laser bishops, not ideal, a weak d4 square, a traffic jam with the pieces. So Fabi tries to unravel, e5's actually best here to make a square on e4, but missed. This was played. Bishop b4 hits the rook, and Fabi's headed in the wrong direction here. And this is when Magnus goes deep into the tank, right? You can see his brain swelling, expanding, and he comes up with the exceptional move, just pure goat chess. Pawn b5 after a massive think, and it's incredibly strong. The basic point is you're opening up your light squared bishop, which is completely unopposed, and it's why you can't take the pawn. You know, what if you try knight e5? Also a critical line to explore. Well, now takes, knight takes, but the queen calmly retreats, and sure you can take here or something, but ultimately, so what? This pawn is coming through one way or another, same problems. Really, really big issues for Fabi. He finds the best response like this. We see takes on d4. You could take immediately on c4. But this is the game. And again, you just can't avoid the liberation of this monster. In one way or another, it's coming. So queen e3 steps out the way. Rook fe8 from Magnus. Really nice prophylactic chess. Because now, if takes on c6, sorry, no, not the line. If a3, and then the bishop dropping back here, well, now after something like this, takes, there's no in-between takes with check and an undefended queen, if you can sort of picture that. You know, this is the line that's fighting against, as well as pressuring the centre. So a3 was actually the game. Fabi didn't take here immediately. And we see Magnus fight back with just another touch of sheer genius. Pawn c3. Leaving an entire bishop hanging because he understands that after takes, which was played, apparently knight f5 best, but black still stands better. But it's such craziness. Let's stick with the game. Bishop takes here. Now if you win back this bishop, you know, one way or the other, well then the pawn takes here. This is the key point. And if something like knight takes, I thought I had this line prepared, but it seems I had a different variation. Maybe I had rook takes prepared. Basically, the pawn is just too strong. What's best? Bishop e5, rook c4, hits a piece and threatens to make a queen. There's various lines like this. It's so complicated where the rooks and the dangerous pawn outshine the white pieces. We won't go too deep because it wasn't played. But the pawn's so dangerous that you can give up the two bishops. So Fabi understands it. He takes the pawn on c3. Now the bishop is hanging. Magnus backs up. Bishop b5 preferred. Why not take here? Definitely playable. This would be a rough line. Something like this. It's a different game. We get something similar, but Fabi takes here. And his idea is we're going to get something the same, but I've got the passed a pawn. It's going to give me huge counterplay. But as usual, Magnus on top form threatens the mate. f3 gives some space, but he forces the rook off the board. And that's huge because the rook wanted to really work together with the minor pieces, try and converge to push this one or create threats to the king. But with the rook gone, Magnus can sweep behind. He wins this c-pawn and then he tucks in behind the passed runner, all under control. Fabi goes for some expansion over here, but at this moment, king f7, bishop's improving slightly. He should wait on the position. the pawn structure's optimal, make Magnus prove something, but instead he pushes. And all this does is create weaknesses. Magnus sweeps around with the rook, he loses a pawn, and suddenly he's got a passed g-pawn to contend with. And the big issue is that Magnus has a rook. He also has a bishop firing on both sides of the board, king's optimally placed, and no one knows what to say at this point, but simply how good Magnus Carlsen is. He's just making Fabi look like a top 50 or something, not the world number 3, keeps picking up these tempos on the bishop, gaining time, keeps his one in the corner here, everything under control, don't blunder the knight, here goes the g-pawn here, and sooner or later, Fabiano Caruana is gonna have to do this. Give a piece.
Give a piece.
And he has to give a piece.
Give a piece.
Because in the end game, if you don't give a piece,
in this endgame where I gave a piece,
then you're going to end up facing a queen. So he gives a piece.
Give a piece.
Now we see rook takes, king b6. This one checks, swinging back behind. Love this move, by the way, saying no knight forks for you, Fabi. This knight swings around. Magnus brings in the king here. Doesn't blunder the rook. He pins. And there's all sorts of winning ideas. You know, watch out for bishop c6 check. So king b4, rook backs up. And Fabi just resigns here. You know what to do, really. If here, don't take the pawn. You run into this check and you're actually drawing the game. But you can check like this, king marches in, you can slowly bring the pieces around, and this is actually a win. Because the knight's in such a bad position, and so's the king, that you threaten mate. And you force white into this Zugzwang, where you can't make a move without losing. This is mate. Okay, what if you run this way? Well, then you bring the king still, step back, this is mate. Bring the knight somewhere, taken. Bring the knight somewhere, taken. These are the various ideas that force through the checkmate. So this is where Fabi threw in the towel. Magnus stormed the tournament. Absolutely incredible event. And in case you missed his games against Gukesh D, have a look at the video on screen. Just out of this world good. Thanks a lot for watching and see you soon. Cheers.